Okay, this is a video that's a continuation of section 2.4, factoring using some new techniques. This portion of the video, or this video is going to talk about factoring with grouping and just doing some other factoring that is a little review from stuff that we've done in the past. So factoring by grouping is something that you can use to be a little creative, to do some factoring when it looks like you can't factor anything out. Okay, so when we're looking at this here, we've got z to the third minus z squared plus 5z minus 5. So it looks like we really can't do any factoring. Like we've got, we don't have a z with the 5, so I can't factor out a z. I can't, there's only a 5 with this and this. There's not a 5 over here, so I can't factor out a 5. But you might notice, if you're a little creative, you can group some things together. And if I'm only looking at this first grouping here, I'm just not going to look at this part at all for now. I'm only looking at z cubed minus z squared. I can factor out a z squared if I'm only looking at that. And I end up with z minus 1 and then my plus. And then if I'm only looking at 5z minus 5, I can factor out a 5. And then I'm left with z minus 1. So you'll notice that I could factor something if I only looked at this part alone and looked at this part alone, which you can do. I could factor out a z squared of the first part and a 5 from the second part. Now here's the thing. Now I've got z squared times z minus 1 plus 5 times z minus 1. It's very similar to if I had z squared times x plus 5x, it's really obvious that I could just factor out an x, right? It would be x times z squared plus 5, okay? But instead of an x, I have a z minus 1. But it's still the same thing. It's the same exact thing here and here. So you can factor out the z minus 1. So the z minus 1 is going to come in front, just like I did with an x. And I'm left with, what I'm doing is I'm dividing this section, this term, by z minus 1, and I have z squared left. And I'm dividing this term by z minus 1, 1, and I have a 5 left. So this, which appeared looked like I couldn't factor it, actually factors to be z minus 1 times z squared plus 5. Okay? The same idea is happening with this one. We can't really factor a t out of everything. We can't factor a number out. But if we do some things, put some things together, we can. Now notice, even if I group it this way, this is not, grouping this and this, that's not really helping anything because I can't factor anything out of this. I can for this, but I can't factor anything out of this, so it's not going to help me. So let's try to rearrange these and see if we can get a little further. So I'm going to do 27 cubed minus 3t, and then I'm going to do plus 45t minus 5. So all I did was I rearranged these. I put the negative 3t over here and the 45t over here. They just switched places, okay? Which is fine because you can add in any order. And I know there's a subtraction sign here, but I just added a negative. So this is like plus negative 3t, so I'm fine. So I'm going to group this together and this together. And when I do that, I can now factor out a 3 and a t out of this first term, and I get a 9t squared minus 1. And then over here I'm going to factor out a 5, and I get a 9t. Oh, I'm sorry, this is supposed to be, I didn't copy this problem right. This is supposed to be a t squared right here. Sorry, that's supposed to be a t squared. Now this will work better. So we're going to factor out a 9, just a 5 out, and have 9t squared minus 1. Okay. Now I've got this and this, same as we had the z minus 1. I can factor this and this out. Okay. So that's 9t squared minus 1. And then I'm left with the 3t plus 5. Okay. Also, double check. You may not be done yet. Right here, I've got the difference of two squares. This is a perfect square, and that's a perfect square. So I can actually factor that into 3t plus 1 times 3t minus 1. And then you still have the 3t plus 5. So this right here, which is what you thought you really couldn't factor, actually can be factored now using grouping and some other things that you know already to factor it into 3 factors like this, okay? So you're going to need a little bit of practice with this grouping. It does take a little bit of practice.